Previously on One Small Ship.
I return to Marella after a year and find her a big mess. I start poking at the cockpit teak decking and find it's in worse condition than I'd hoped. I end up spending the winter tearing out a big part of it, but do I have the skill to put it back together again? I start installing a cheap Chinese diesel heater. The fuel tank is in place, but it still needs heat ducting, power and fuel pump. And the propane gas installation needs to be finished to safety standards. My name is Andy, and this is the story of One Small Ship. Back in November, in between struggles with the cockpit teak, I start looking at the propane gas installation. When we bought Marella, the gas bottle was just strapped to a shelf underneath the cooker with complete disregard for safety regulations, and that first winter I made it a priority to make the gas installation up to code. However, life happened and the project stalled. I had planned to mount the gas in the aft locker, but after much consideration, I changed my mind. So I bought this thing from Aldi, which is a sort of like a bucket with a lid on it that you clamp down. So this is what it looks like in the locker. It's just a double H bracket that I've built and glued together with epoxy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to screw this bucket into it, and then later on I will drill, fill and drill holes and mount it with through bolts instead of screws. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark these on the side of the cockpit sole, make those slot into each other like little Tetris pieces, and then I'm going to glue this into place, and that epoxy should keep the whole thing together and keep it strong. It should be just as strong as before. On this end we'll cut them to fit the shape of the hull, and that should sort that end out as well. Fast forward to April 2020. The days are still cold, but they are getting longer now, and the air is slowly warming. On my way down to Marella, I visit my friends at the local chandlery to stock up on supplies for the heater installation. Right, so I'm back on board the boat. I've got a bag full of goodies, and let's take a look at what I've got. So, Y connectors, ton of hose clamps, and 2 vents. So what I planned was to put the vent right here. This drawer front is 19.5 centimeters. So if I just take a rough measurement, it doesn't have to be exact, but I do want it as close as possible. If I take a rough measurement at the height, that's 7.5, so 7.5 would be here. I want to just make doubly sure that this vent is going to fit inside the hull. The way we do that is we double check with the hole saw, and they are spot on. I admit this is a bit fiddly, and I probably should have done this before I mounted the whole thing on there. That is what that is going to look like. Okay, so this hole has obviously got a bit of an issue. The fact that there is a hole here already means that I have nothing to center the hole saw with. I'm going to try to eyeball this.
By mid-April, the weather is finally warm enough to work comfortably outside. We take a weekend at the boatyard. The girls are playing by the shore, while the grown-ups work on the boat. I made a mistake using one-component paint for the locker lids, so Lena is taking a scraper to them to get rid of all the new paint. We'll need to do it again, and do it right. While she's working on that, I get on with the heater installation.
So I want the heat ducting to go under here, aft to the heater, and under there's a big hole that somebody drilled previously. I think that was used for a previous heating installation, so I might reuse that, pull the heating duct underneath and behind the engine, up and aft.
Said and done, I start with the piece of heat ducting that goes between the heater itself and the cabin. First, I get it all in place and measure out the length. I then insulate and install it in place, routing it up and around the inside of the aft locker, fastening it with hose clamps. Finally, I route the electrics for the heater. First the 12 volts from a fuse box at the companionway, and then the wires to the control panel, which will sit above the main breaker at the chart table.
So what I've got here is a piece of metal bar that I cut out, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill some holes in it. One here, and one here. And this hole here is going to be holding the muffler for the exhaust for the heater, and these two holes are going to hold it in place underneath the heater, so it's just come out a little bit, and so that I can mount the heater to it.
The muffler I'm using is a marine type. The one that came with the heater was not sealed and would have leaked gases into the boat. I seal the joints with exhaust sealant, then I mount the fuel pump. The instructions say to not put it horizontally, but I can't find a good position for it in the vertical, so I end up mounting it at an angle. Finally, it's time to install the control panel and fire the heater up for the first time.
So I'm reading the Pidgin English manual that came with the heater, and it's kind of hard to interpret at times, but trying to figure out how to prime the fuel line in the non-setting state, whatever that is. Press the down regulation button first, and then press confirm button to enter the manual pump interface. Down and confirm. It says H off. Release confirm button first and then release the down regulation button. Press up regulation button to start pump. Oh yeah. Press down regulation button to turn it off. Alright, so the fuel line is primed, and I think that's all I need to actually start this thing up. Trying to find any first start instructions, but there's really nothing much. This Pidgin English manual is just useless. I can't make heads or tails of it, so we're just going to leave it, and let's turn it on. Discharging 2 amps, 3.5, 4 amps, 7 amps. I can hear the fuel pump now. And the fan has started running. Yep, that's hot air coming right now. There's the smell of burning diesel, which I'm sure is because I haven't done the final installation of the exhaust yet. That's nice hot air coming from the vent here. Well, from the tube, because I haven't connected it to a vent yet. But I think that's enough of a test, so I'm going to turn it off and we'll let the shutdown process complete. We'll see how that turns out. I can hear the blower going. It's kind of burning off excess fuel in there. Right, so I'm going to wait for the fan to power down, and I'll call that a successful test. Very nice. So I'm quite pleased that I put this on the 24-hour systems fuse box and not on the main breaker, because if I turn off the main breaker now, turned off the main breaker, fan is still going. I do want to put a separate switch somewhere for the heater, but I'm going to hide it to make sure that nobody trips it, that the shutdown cycle is completed every time, and that the heater burns off all the excess fuel in there, that it cools down properly so as not to be a fire hazard, and so on and so forth. As soon as it's cooled down, I'm going to wrap the exhaust in the insulating tape that I have, and then make a gasket for the exhaust through hole, and for the intake I'm just going to put Sika on there. I still need to install the rest of the heat ducting and the insulation, connected to the vents and all that. That's the fan turning off, by the way, after 10 minutes. But yeah, so those are my next steps, and then I can pretty much cross off the heater from the list of things to do.
The first test run of the heater is a resounding success, and I couldn't be happier. The next day, I set about finishing up the heater installation by hooking up the vents in the cabin and V-berth to insulated ducting and connecting it all to the heater unit. One of this spring's major projects is finally nearing completion.
Probably have about 2 or 3 hours total running the heater now, and it's been working beautifully. I really like it, and it's keeping the boat warm on days like this when it's blowing, which makes it a lot easier for me to work on the boat, so that is just phenomenal. So, jumping from project to project for a little bit, I'm going to be working on the gas locker, and that involves actually drilling a hole in my boat. And so I drilled the pilot hole for the gas locker escape. I think I put it in the right place, but it is a compromise. It could have been a little bit higher above the waterline. But anyway, so we're going to go outside and we're going to drill that hole. I'm going to start drilling it from the inside and then drill the rest of it from the outside to avoid as much damage to the gel coat as I possibly can. Okay, so here's where the hole is. There's where I made my mark. It's like 2 centimeters from where I thought it would be. So I'm really happy about that.
LPG, or liquid petroleum gas, or propane, is, statistically speaking, one of the safest ways to cook on a boat, but only if you meet certain safety standards, and if you want to use propane on your boat, you should absolutely check with your local yacht association or regulatory body to find out what you should do. Here I'm working on the escape fitting, which in the case of a leak will let the gas flow overboard instead of into the boat. Since propane is heavier than air, it would otherwise pool at the lowest point in the boat and could potentially build to explosive concentrations.
So we're going to start glassing this whole scaffold in, and for that I'm going to start sanding this area where it's going to meet the hull, right here and right here. Good. Not worried about leaving a little bit of old paint here because it's not that super structural. So we're going to do the other side as well, and then just clean it with acetone and start dabbing epoxy down to bond it. So I've mixed up some epoxy with 406 and 402, so it's got this pretty hard consistency with fiberglass strands in it. We're going to start just spreading this evenly across this area here. So these are the notches on the other side. I'm going to just stick some epoxy in there. Make sure those are filled out nicely. That's done that. Finally, this bit here. That's one side. I really don't like working with epoxy. It's goopy and yucky and messy and looks like ice cream, according to my daughter. What?
Time is 3 o'clock.
Is it 3 o'clock? Okay, well, it's about time to go home. Alright. I think that'll do.
After taking my daughter home, I returned to put the finishing touches on the exhaust and intake fittings, crossing the heater project off the to-do list. Now I can focus entirely on the new cockpit teak. Stay tuned for the next part of our journey, and thank you so much for watching. Fair winds.